On our anniversary trip, my husband handed me a plane ticket and said, "You're flying home alone." You embarrassed me in front of my boss. I sat at the airport crying as he laughed. But 2 weeks later, he got called on stage and froze when he realized I was. My name's Delia, I'm 42, from Chicago, and what you're about to hear is the beginning of the end, and then, surprisingly, the beginning of everything else. Colby and I had been married for 10 years. The kind of marriage that looks okay from the outside. Maybe even aspirational. People thought we were the well-dressed couple at dinner parties. The ones who always brought good wine and a story from our latest trip. But on the inside? We were hollowing out year by year. Colby worked in corporate logistics, a clean-cut guy, punctual to a fault, the kind of man who wore cufflinks even when he didn't need to. I used to joke that if you opened his brain, you'd find spreadsheets and Google Calendar blocks. I was more loose, creative. I worked in marketing strategy before I stepped back to take care of my mom when she had a minor stroke. That time away changed me more than I realized. Slowed me down. Brought me back to what mattered. It didn't change Colby. If anything, he became more distant, more fixated on advancement. His promotions were coming fast, and with each one, he grew more obsessed with appearances, how we looked, who we talked to, what kind of impression we gave. The trip to Greece was supposed to be for us. A second honeymoon, he called it. But a week before we left, he mentioned that his boss, Murray Quinn, and his wife Cheryl would be in Santorini too. He said it like it was a coincidence, but I knew Colby. Nothing in his life was coincidental. He pitched it like an opportunity. A chance to show how strong his partnership was. I should have paid more attention to the phrasing. Because he didn't mean our partnership, he meant his company's partnership with Murray. At first, it was magical. We stayed at this little boutique hotel in Oia with whitewashed walls and blue shutters, right on the edge of the cliffside. Woke up to the sound of bells from donkeys below and the smell of strong coffee drifting up through the window. For the first 3 days, it felt like we were reconnecting. We even laughed like we used to, about the tourists taking selfies, or the waiter who tried to matchmake us with another American couple. But everything shifted the night we arrived at Murray and Cheryl's rented villa. It was this absurdly luxurious cliffside estate, the kind you see in Instagram reels with infinity pools and glowing lanterns. Cheryl greeted me warmly. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, wearing one of those flowy silk kaftans and no shoes. Her energy was unfiltered and honestly kind of refreshing. She poured us drinks immediately and said she was glad someone normal was here. Murray was all business. The kind of man who seemed to size people up by their handshake and how expensive their watch looked. I hated how Colby leaned into it. His laugh changed around Murray. It got higher, more exaggerated. He kept touching my back, guiding me where to stand, whispering reminders about not being too political. Dinner was local grilled lamb and fava puree, with endless bottles of Assyrtiko. At some point, politics came up. Not aggressively, just casually, as we talked about the global economy and trade. I made a joke, light-hearted but pointed, about how international shipping was one of the biggest carbon offenders in the world, and how companies like Murray's had a long way to go. Everyone went quiet. Murray gave a half-smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Cheryl burst out laughing and said, "Finally. Someone who says what we're all thinking." But Colby? He looked like I'd slapped him. He didn't say anything then, but his jaw tensed, and I felt his hand grip my leg under the table, hard enough that I had to shift. That night, in our room, he exploded. Said I had derailed everything, that I had no idea what was at stake. He called me selfish. Said I was supposed to support him, not undermine him. I told him, "I'm not your prop, Colby. I'm your wife." He didn't sleep in the same room that night. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds outside and the soft hum of the pool pump. My suitcase was by the door. A printed itinerary lay on top. Flight, Athens to Chicago, 10:10 a.m. One way. Passenger, Delia Madden. I walked out into the living room. He was dressed, sipping espresso like it was a regular Tuesday. "I changed your flight," he said. "You're going home early." I stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about? We still have 4 more days. I can't have you here. Not after last night. You embarrassed me." I thought he was kidding. But the look in his eyes? There was no warmth. Just calculation. "I'll come back in a week." "You need to go." It's hard to describe the feeling of being cast aside so casually. Like an employee being let go with 2 weeks' notice, only I didn't even get that courtesy. I didn't argue. I packed my things in silence. Got into the car Cheryl helped me call, and sat in the back seat trying to keep my breathing steady. At the airport, surrounded by strangers speaking a language I barely knew, I sat on a cracked plastic chair near the check-in counter and cried. Not sobs. Just quiet, heavy tears. The kind that keep coming even when you think you've run out. Colby didn't call. Not once. Not even to check if I'd landed. But that silence? It became a gift. Back in Chicago, I stayed at my old apartment. I hadn't sold it. Colby always said it was a waste of money, but something told me to keep it. Thank God I did. I replayed everything. Our early years. The slow erasure of my voice. The way he stopped asking me what I wanted. The way I stopped speaking up because it was just easier. And then I remembered something. Before the trip, Colby had roped me into helping with his pitch deck. He said his team was too busy, and he just needed a woman's eye on the visuals. I ended up doing almost all of it. The concept, the story, the branding. Even hooked him up with data from a contact I had at an environmental consulting firm. And I did it all because, for a moment, I thought helping him succeed would help us succeed. Now? Now it felt like theft. I started making calls. One of them was to Ramona Yu, a former client of mine from back in the day, now the CEO of a rapidly growing port logistics company based in New York. As it turns out, she was the one Colby was pitching to. I didn't tell her to cancel the deal. I just told her the truth. And she listened. She called me back 2 days later. Ramona's voice was calm, but there was a quiet fire underneath it. She said, "Delia, I looked at the deck. I recognized your touch immediately. I didn't know you were involved." I told her everything. Not to ruin Colby, though, sure, that would have been satisfying, but because I wanted the truth out there. I wasn't going to be part of a lie anymore, especially not one that boosted the man who handed me a one-way ticket home like I was a forgotten carry-on. Ramona didn't say much after that. Just thanked me for being honest and said she'd handle it. Meanwhile, Colby was still in Greece, still posting filtered photos of caldera sunsets and perfectly curated breakfast trays like nothing happened. His captions were full of vague inspirational quotes, "Sometimes the best view comes after the hardest climb." I could barely look at them without rolling my eyes. I wondered if his boss knew he'd sent his wife home mid-trip. I wondered if Cheryl told anyone. My gut said no. Cheryl seemed like the type who saw everything but said nothing. She had that quiet, practiced politeness that comes from years of being someone's accessory instead of partner. I thought about texting her, but stopped myself. What was the point? She owed me nothing. Instead, I focused on building myself back up. I dusted off my resume. Reached out to old clients, colleagues, mentors. People I'd fallen out of touch with during the years I was busy being Colby's plus one. The response surprised me. It wasn't pity. It was warmth. Gratitude. Respect. Apparently, I'd left a mark I hadn't even realized. One of them, Jacqueline Rivera, a former creative director I worked with on a branding campaign years ago, asked me to guest lecture at her design workshop. That small invitation lit a spark I hadn't felt in a long time. It reminded me who I used to be. Who I still was, beneath all the compromises. Colby returned to the States a week later. I knew because I saw his calendar alert pop up on the shared app we hadn't disconnected yet. NYC, U Summit, 3 p.m. That was the pitch. The one he'd been working toward for months. The one where he planned to use my work as his mic drop moment. He still didn't know I'd spoken to Ramona. And that, I'll admit, felt kind of delicious. That morning, I put on one of my old conference outfits, a tailored navy dress, low heels, simple earrings, and took the 9:35 flight to New York. It was the first time I'd flown alone since the Santorini mess, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little anxious. But the moment we touched down at LaGuardia, I felt something shift. I wasn't just showing up to watch him fail. I was showing up to remind myself I existed. The event was at a sleek corporate venue near Hudson Yards. Not the kind of place I usually hung out anymore, too polished, too self-congratulatory, but it was familiar enough that I knew how to move through it. I blended in easily with the other attendees, all sharp blazers and ID badges. I didn't RSVP, of course. But Ramona had someone meet me at the entrance. She called me her special guest. When I stepped into the room, it felt like I had walked into an old version of my life. Bright lights, hushed chatter, the clinking of coffee cups on saucers. I took a seat in the second row, dead center. Perfect line of sight to the podium. A few minutes later, Colby walked out. He looked sharp. Confident. Polished, as always. But I saw at the moment his eyes swept the crowd and landed on me. He flinched. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I saw it. A tiny crack in his armor. He looked away quickly, pretended I wasn't there. Picked up the clicker for his slides, cleared his throat, and started in on his pitch. And oh, he used every slide I'd designed. Every word. Every story arc. Every bit of strategy that I had poured into it during late nights while he barked edits from the couch. For the first 10 minutes, he cruised. He had his corporate charm on full blast. People nodded. A few even clapped mid-presentation. Then Ramona stepped on stage. She smiled politely and said, "Before we move to questions, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the creative strategist behind the foundation of this proposal. Someone whose insight and experience made this vision possible." She gestured toward me. Delia Madden. Heads turned. Colby stopped mid-sentence. His face drained of color. His mouth opened, then shut again. For a second, it looked like he was about to say something, but nothing came out. I watched him realize, in real time, that he wasn't in control. The silence in the room was thick. I didn't stand. Didn't smile. I just sat there, watching him the way he had watched me walk through airport security in Athens, cold and certain. Ramona continued like nothing was wrong. Integrity matters to us. Partnership matters. When we do business, we want to know that the people we work with value the minds behind the ideas, not just the face in the boardroom. There was no applause. No polite laughter. Just stillness. Colby looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. And I felt more powerful than I had in years. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to yell or cause a scene. The truth had done its work. All I had to do was sit still and let him feel it. After the session, I walked out without looking back. No words. No confrontation. Just quiet, deliberate steps toward the exit and back into the life I was reclaiming. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. Because once Colby's pitch fell apart, so did everything else. Colby didn't try to chase me down after that summit. No dramatic text, no late-night calls, no half-hearted explanations waiting in my inbox. Nothing. And honestly, that silence? It told me everything I needed to know. But things were unraveling for him, fast. Through a former colleague of his, someone who'd always been friendly at events, and who reached out to me quietly a few days later, I found out the fallout wasn't just internal. Word had spread that the proposal was misrepresented, and that there were ethical concerns about credit attribution. Apparently, the higher-ups didn't like that kind of drama, especially when it could impact future partnerships. His promotion was postponed indefinitely. Then came the emails. First from the HR director at his company. Then from their legal department. Nothing threatening, just routine follow-ups about who had been involved in the pitch materials, whether there had been outside contributions, and if proper documentation existed. Oh, did I have documentation? Every version of the deck. Emails with his requests. My own notes. Text messages where he'd ask me to tweak a headline, or polish a data point. Even voice memos where he recorded rough ideas and told me, just make it sound smart. I didn't want to sue him. I didn't want money. I just wanted him to stop pretending I was invisible. While he was trying to mop up the mess he made, I was quietly rebuilding. Jacqueline asked me to speak again, this time at a larger conference for creative professionals in Minneapolis. That trip changed everything. I was nervous at first, my hands shook as I stood in front of the microphone, but when I started talking about the way women's ideas are often absorbed, diluted, or outright stolen in corporate environments, the whole room leaned in. People nodded. Took notes. Lined up afterward to say, that happened to me too. I realized I wasn't alone. And that's when I knew, I had more to say. A few weeks later, I started a consulting firm. Just small at first, freelance brand strategy, storytelling workshops, presentation design. I called it Second Draft. Because sometimes life gives you a messy, half-baked version of something, and you've got to rewrite it yourself. The first few clients came from referrals. Then people started reaching out to me directly. Women mostly. Mid-career professionals who were sick of being behind the scenes. I helped them pitch themselves, reframe their experience, take ownership of their own voices. Every time I sat across from a woman and helped her articulate her worth, I felt stronger. More rooted. Like the pieces of myself I'd lost in my marriage were coming back, but sharper. Clearer. Colby, meanwhile, started to vanish from social media. First fewer posts, then none. His LinkedIn went quiet. Mutual acquaintances began mentioning that he was taking some time, or that he was exploring new directions. Corporate speak for, everything's on fire. He didn't reach out until nearly 4 months after the summit. An email. Short. Cold. No subject line. I heard you've been talking to people. I just want to say it would be better for both of us if you didn't continue to bring up the summit incident. I'm trying to move forward, and I hope you'll respect that. I stared at the screen for a full minute. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a vague threat wrapped in a velvet glove. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Ramona, just in case. Then I blocked him. I didn't want to live in the shadow of his narrative anymore. But just because I was moving forward didn't mean the rest of the story was done playing out. About 6 months after the summit, I got an unexpected call from Elena, Colby's sister. We hadn't spoken in over a year. We were never especially close, but she had always been polite, warm. She was one of the few people in his life who had ever said to me, "You're too good for him, you know that, right?" I answered on instinct. "Delia? I hope this isn't weird. I heard what happened in New York. And I wanted to say, good for you." I was stunned. "You heard about that?" Elena sighed. "You know how these things get around. Word travels. Especially when it's about Colby." She went on to tell me things I hadn't known. Things that made my stomach twist. Apparently, Colby had always had a history of erasing the women in his orbit. In high school, he was caught plagiarizing a group project, taking credit for work his then-girlfriend did. In college, he accidentally left a woman's name off a co-authored paper that ended up getting published in a student journal. There was a pattern. I just hadn't seen it clearly until now. Elena said, "I'm not trying to stir the pot. I just think you should know, you weren't the first." But you might be the first to actually stop him. That stayed with me. Because I'd spent so long thinking maybe I was just overly sensitive. That maybe I had made a big deal out of nothing. That maybe what happened in Greece was just a bad fight, an overreaction. But no. It was the culmination. A long, slow erosion of respect, of credit, of identity. And I had finally dammed the river. I went for a walk after that call. Through the park by my apartment, where the trees had just started to bloom again. Spring was late that year, but it came in a rush once it started, bright pink cherry blossoms and that warm, wet smell of thawed earth. I sat on a bench near the fountain and just breathed. Not thinking about Colby. Not thinking about revenge or justice. Just breathing. Letting the weight of the last 10 years fall off one shoulder at a time. I had no idea what he'd do next. If he'd try to claw his way back up the ladder, or rebrand himself as a thought leader somewhere, or disappear completely into another life with another woman who didn't yet know how small he could make you feel. But I knew what I was going to do. And that part of the story isn't finished yet. I didn't hear anything else from Colby for months after Elena's call. And truthfully, I didn't need to. Life was moving. My business, Second Draft, had grown beyond what I imagined. I'd started hiring part-time freelancers to help with overflow. A friend helped me rebrand the website. Word of mouth was spreading, and for the first time in years, I was waking up excited instead of anxious. I even reconnected with some of the friends I'd grown distant from during the Colby years. It was awkward at first, I'll admit. There were a few hard conversations, people wondering why I'd pulled away, why I hadn't asked for help when things got bad. But when I told them what happened, really told them, the responses were warm. Understanding. One friend cried and said, "You used to be the brightest person in the room." I missed her. I missed her too. Then one afternoon in early October, as the leaves were turning gold and the air started to carry that hint of cinnamon and firewood, I got a call from Shayla, a former colleague I hadn't spoken to in ages. She was now head of HR at a large consulting firm in Chicago. "Delia," she said, almost laughing, "you'll never believe who applied for a job here." I already knew. "I'm guessing his resume looked great," I said. It did. But a few people on the exec team knew what happened in New York. "Someone forwarded your summit video." Ah yes, the summit. Apparently, someone in the audience had recorded Ramona's speech. Nothing flashy, just a clean 30-second clip of her crediting me for the pitch, panning slightly to capture Colby's stunned silence. It had made its way onto LinkedIn and had quietly gone viral in professional circles. A cautionary tale wrapped in business casual. "What do you want me to do?" Shayla asked. "We haven't officially declined him yet." I paused. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need to ruin him. He was doing a fine job of that himself. So I said, "Don't decline him. Interview him. Let him think it's going well. Let him believe he has it in the bag." She chuckled. "And then?" "Then tell him you had a change of heart after consulting someone whose work he once stole." The pause on her end was thick with satisfaction. "Consider it done." The next week, I got a text from her, "He just left the building." Looked like he swallowed a lemon. That was enough for me. I never wanted Colby to fail just for failure's sake. What I wanted, what I needed, was for him to know he couldn't keep stepping on people and expect no one to notice. To understand that the world wasn't just going to bend around his ego anymore. And the best part? I never had to raise my voice. I never had to burn down his life. I just had to stand still and tell the truth. In the months that followed, Second Draft went global. I started doing virtual workshops for women in India, the UK, South Africa. I was interviewed on a podcast about professional reinvention. I wrote a piece for Fast Company that was shared over 1,000 times. People messaged me saying, "Your story gave me the push to quit my toxic job." I finally confronted my boss about credit. I remembered that I'm allowed to take up space. That was the real victory. Not Colby's downfall, but the ripple effect. How one act of standing up for myself turned into a wave of other women doing the same. I even started seeing someone new. Slowly. Carefully. His name's Jared, a structural engineer with a dry sense of humor and zero social media presence. He listens more than he talks, makes really good risotto, and once told me, after our third date, "You're not intimidating. You're just used to being unheard. We're taking it slow." I like it that way. One night, a few months ago, I found myself back in Greece, on my own terms this time. I had been invited to speak at a leadership retreat in Athens. After the event, I took a ferry to Santorini. Booked myself into that same hotel Colby and I had stayed in all those years ago. I walked the same narrow streets. Ate at the same little cafe by the cliff. But this time I wasn't looking over my shoulder, or dimming myself to fit into someone else's life. I was alone. And free. And so full. I sat on that same terrace with a glass of wine, watching the sun dip below the Aegean, painting everything in gold and crimson. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel like I'd lost anything. I felt like I had reclaimed everything. Colby? I don't know what he's doing now. I don't keep tabs. He's not part of my story anymore. But every once in a while, when someone says, "You seem so confident, so calm, what changed?" I smile. Because the truth is, sometimes your greatest heartbreak becomes the door to your best self. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living a life so full, so honest, so yours, that they can't touch it.